Hello there, listeners. It's Susie New from the Australian Society of Anaesthetists, and thank you for listening to the Australian Anaesthesia podcast. Workforce. What a huge topic at the moment. I've heard a former chief medical officer saying that we as specialists should all be working at the top of our scope and that clinical nurse specialists can do the work of anaesthesia registrars. We've seen in the UK the safety concerns with anaesthesia associates who are not doctors, which has led to a pause in their recruitment. And more recently, there's been the launch of the expedited SIMG pathway by the Medical Board of Australia. So who better to speak about this than my next guest, Professor David Story, current president of the college. In this episode, Professor Story and I discuss the various pathways SIMGs can take to get specialist recognition in Australia. If you, as an Australian specialist, are considering getting involved, then I encourage you to pay attention as he points out some really significant considerations for us. I'm front-ending this episode and mentioning some of the links that are included in the show notes. Putting my AMA hat on, that's the Australian Medical Association. If you didn't know, I sit on the AMA Federal Council as the Anaesthesia Specialty Representative. So if you have any queries there, feel free to get in touch with me. Anyway, the AMA, the ASA, you'll hear us discuss it more in this episode. We support medically led provision and coordination of multidisciplinary care. This is huge in primary care, where you have nurse practitioners, allied health pharmacists, multiple other health professionals. And who, I ask, has the breadth and depth of training, experience and knowledge to coordinate and lead this care, as well as the lack of commercial conflicts of interest? I do not dismiss this as an issue only for primary care. Watch out, anaesthetists. This is one of the reasons the ASA conducts our regular workforce survey. A few years ago, we looked like we were in oversupply. But since the pandemic, that has changed. There's still a maldistribution between regional and metropolitan centres, and that's another topic that Professor Story and I discuss. Finally, I know there'll be some of you listening to this episode because you are from overseas and you might be contemplating a move here. I'll break down some of the Australian-specific terms that we use at the end of the episode and point you in the direction of some resources. I will make one point here though, and that is that the ASA and the college do not control the numbers of anaesthetists that are trained in Australia. Anaesthetists of Australia, you and I know this like the sun will rise tomorrow. But I am surprised how many health bureaucrats, commentators, so-called experts don't know this. If we want more Australian trained anaesthetists, then it's up to the health services to employ them. The ASA and the college do not get to define that number. It seemed like too obvious a question to ask the president of the college, which is why I mention it here. All right, speaking of which, let's get into it. Well, thank you. Thanks for giving up some time this morning to have a chat with me.
Yeah, sure.
Always lovely chatting with you.
Yeah, thanks, Susie.
Can I just clarify, you're still the ASA? Oh, God,
Freudian.
Are you going to become the ASA president one day?
I'm a proud ASA member, but I think one presidency in a lifetime is probably enough.
I know that feeling. I wanted to check, you're still ANZCA President at the moment?
Yeah, I'm ANZCA President through to the end of the ANZCA ASM in May next year in Auckland.
Oh, great. I was about to ask you where the ANZCA ASM is next year. So Auckland. All right,
yes.
Excellent. Start planning, start getting that leave booked in, right?
Yep.
Well done. I think you've had a great presidency so far. I feel like it's almost been 2 years because I hear from you and see so much of you. Thank you for doing a great job representing our specialty.
Yeah, thanks, Susie.
I really wanted to pick your brains because I'm getting a lot of questions from people, not just within Australia, but also from overseas about what's happening with this expedited pathway and what it means for people who are anaesthetists overseas and wanting to come and work in Australia. So I thought you're in the best position. You've been having this conversation for quite a while now. So can you just give me an overview of what it is?
I'll give you a short answer and then a long answer.
Perfect.
So I tested it this morning. For those who really want to know what's happening, I suggest going to the ANZCA website, and if you type in expedited SIMG into the search bar, you'll come up with relevant bits.
Awesome. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Before you launch into it, because SIMG might be a term that we are familiar with in Australia, but for people who are listening from overseas, what does SIMG mean?
So SIMG stands for Specialist International Medical Graduate. And the reason the S or the specialist is that if we remember that Australia has GP and non-GP specialists who've gone through formal college training, there are junior doctors, and some people come into Australia working as junior doctors, so they're generally called IMGs or international medical graduates rather than those either going through or being recognised as specialists.
Right. So these are people who've already got their specialist qualification back in their home country. They're fully fledged anaesthetists. They, from their point of view, don't require any further training if they were to remain within their home country.
From an ANZCA point of view and from a national point of view, there are three broad categories based around the word comparable. So comparable to the Australian system. And I think increasingly we're looking at comparable to a brand new first-year FANZCA. The College of Surgeons got into a bit of strife recently where they appeared not to be comparing to first-year surgeons.
That's true.
But the comparable standard is a first-year fellow.
Okay.
And that includes sort of the generalism. The federal government are very big on generalism at the moment. I think the breadth of ability of a brand new FANZCA who's recently done obstetrics, who's recently done peds, recently done a lot of stuff, is probably different to those of us who are well down the track and
definitely
have moved away from areas of practice.
It's a balance, isn't it? We lose skills in some areas, but we become experts in other areas. It's really hard to become an expert at everything. And this would really apply for, say, people, and I get this a bit like, I've been a paediatric cardiac anaesthetist for 12 years.
Yeah, I might just go back to the comparable bit, just to clarity. So we have substantially comparable, which is, this group from the United Kingdom and from Ireland. Mm-hmm. Then we have partly comparable, and this is from a number of other countries, particularly people from India. One of the issues when we're talking about people from India in particular, but other countries that don't have a college-based system. So both the UK and Ireland have a college-based system. So if you like, there's a consistent national standard. India in particular has much greater variation across the country.
I see.
And some people are comparable and some are not. There's also the duration of training, the duration of medical school. This is one of the points of tension sometimes when people are being assessed, is someone from the same country might get a different rating.
Yes.
So we have substantially comparable, partly comparable, then non-comparable. And the non-comparable people, if they wish to practice in Australia, really need to come through and probably do the entire FANZCA training program.
And that would involve, prior to that, getting AMC.
Yes, so there's also the AMC component.
And I should clarify, AMC is the Australian Medical Council, which is a series of exams and assessments in order to be deemed a medical practitioner. Yeah.
So there's a number of different players and all of this that they're easy to confuse. So we have the Australian Health Practitioner Regulatory Authority, and then the Medical Board or the MBA, and then sort of a partner organisation of them, the Australian Medical Council. And the Medical Council not only accredits practitioners to a certain degree when the Medical Board will register them, the AMC also accredits colleges and university medical schools. So there's a number of players in all this. So you're correct in saying there's also the AMC exams. There are different pathways. But having said that, for people who are partly comparable, they may be asked just to sit the final exam viva as an assessment of capability. If you're thinking about that again is very much a generalist type exam. The group we're really talking about at the moment, as you say, are people who have come from the UK and Ireland, college-based systems, but a medical system that's quite similar to Australia. And I think that's the other component, is that when the college assesses SIMGs, or people applying to be SIMGs, is really the environment that they work in. How similar is it to Australia? There's also a degree of recency of practice. So it does become complex when you talk about someone who has basically just practiced paediatric cardiac. There are sort of specialist pathways, but there may be requirements. So I think, and that often requires a degree of negotiation. I mean, the one thing the college has learned with all of this, I can give you a little bit of the history, but the one thing I think we've really learned is that to work with government and various bureaucratic bodies, the college needs to be a combination of greater flexibility, but also lines in the sand. So we'll say, look, we will provide a degree of flexibility in this, but here are our lines in the sand. This is where we think if we go below this, it is unacceptable practice.
Yeah.
So I'll give it.
Why does that matter?
One of the great mysteries about the whole SIMG situation is that there was a thing called the Cruck Review, which was done by a health bureaucrat. And one of the things she recommended was to review expedited processes. Now, the thing that we collectively as a college have never had an adequate answer to is how that sort of look at expedited process became the medical board will take this over. Remember, the medical board registers doctors but has little expertise in assessing specialists. And this is our ongoing concern about this. The other allegation was that the colleges were very slow. So, and perhaps too hard, particularly on people from substantially comparable countries. When we look, but no one actually came to us and said, hey, ANZCA, what can you do to speed this up and let's talk about it? There was none of that. And this is one of the most irritating things. So what we've done, so in the past, people would apply to ANZCA from the UK and Ireland and they would get, paper assessment, an interview. They had to do EMAC. They had to have a workplace-based assessment, but they also had to have a 12-month supervised period. So what we've said, having reviewed this and looked at what the medical board's doing and other things, is say, okay, you still have to do the paper submission. We've removed the interview. We've cut supervision back to 6 months. EMAC, both the medical board and ANZCA insists on EMAC. And then the big difference is the workplace-based assessment by two assessors who, if you like, have been trained by ANZCA to assess SIMGs. So one of the issues is that all of us would assume, I know good anaesthetists and bad. However, that's quite different from systematically assessing someone's practice. One thing I will say that has become apparent is that some people have good experiences, some people don't have such great experiences, and no human-based system is perfect. And I recognise that there are people out there who listen to me and say, look, ANZCA's dreadful, etc. And I think it's possible they may not have had a good experience. But we do our best. Our number one priority is, in fact, quality of patient care, but also the workforce wellbeing. So one of the reasons we're really pushing for people to come through the expedite process and also simultaneously become ANZCA fellows is the mentoring. People may say, yes, UK and Ireland are great. Our experience over the last 10 years is about 1% there's clinical concerns, but about 20% have issues settling in. And one of the problems with all of this is that the whole aim of the game was to improve rural workforce. That was what was all meant to be about, and has led to, I think politicians love a silver bullet, and I think they were led to believe by bureaucrats and others that expedite SIMGs would be the magic thing to fix rural workforce. I was at a meeting with all the presidents, with all the health ministers. It was made very clear to them that even where there are Medicare item numbers that sort of limit regional practice, there's so many ways to get around it. And specific colleges said, 3/4 of our SIMG, international SIMGs have moved back from the country into the city within 4 years. So ANZCA has made things easier. The big ticket item is still the workplace-based assessment. That's probably the single biggest difference between us and the medical board. The other one is the medical board, to my mind, has grossly inadequate supervision requirements. A supervisor from the medical board just needs to be had 12 months of practice in Australia. For ANZCA,
right, as an
anaesthetist, as a specialist anaesthetist.
Right.
So you might have someone who has very little knowledge of the Australian system. Yes, they've worked here for 12 months. If you come through for SIMG and you want to get an ANZCA fellowship, your supervisor will need to be a FANZCA, will need to be a fellow of the College of Anaesthetists.
Yeah. As part of that, we've worked in multiple locations. Yeah. Many people have moved between different cities as well. So we actually do have a very good understanding about different centres, regional, rural, metropolitan hospitals, tertiary hospitals, that someone who's only worked in Australia for 12 months, they might not have that breadth of experience across the Australian health system.
Yeah. Normally, we don't know who they are, meaning ANZCA doesn't know who people are. But to our mind, it would be much better if they'd come through, they can do the medical board process, they get a supervisor who's a FANZCA, which is a higher standard, particularly as you say, Susie, the elements of understanding our system, the networking, all those sort of things. Because what we've kept saying to government is the supervisors are more than just supervisors, that they are mentors as well.
Yeah, true.
For exactly the sort of things you're talking about. If you look at the ANZCA website today, you'll see for people who are coming from the UK and Ireland, this is how I can simultaneously do the medical board expedited and go through ANZCA.
Okay, so they can do them both at the same time, and then if they do the ANZCA one as well, they'll be asked to do workplace-based assessments, plus they'll get a supervisor who we know is definitely a FANZCA, so that's the key difference.
Correct. Where this gets complex is in the past, people, and including my own hospital and probably yours as well, people come through from the UK and Ireland and they do a year of basically a provisional fellow year. And so they come in and they're paid as a trainee or a senior trainee, but they sort of get direct supervision. And so that's relatively straightforward. In this new system, they come in and they're registered as specialist practitioners. Now, there's been some pushback from hospitals.
Even when they're not a specialist, when they're only provisional fellows?
Well, this is my understanding what the medical board's doing. Communication with the medical board has been pretty ordinary. It's improved over the last few months, but prior to that, it was very, very difficult. I must say it compared quite differently to the AMC. I just want to indicate the difficulty we've had. So we had a meeting with a senior member of the AMC and a senior person from the medical board. This was a Zoom meeting. I was on it. Other people from the college were on it. And the person from the AMC said, we struggle with the nuance of what you do. And I said, you've just given the demonstration as to why we are so concerned about this. I then said to the person from the medical board, our number one aims are the quality of patient care and workforce wellbeing. And their response was, yes, you've said that. And that was it. So these are the sort of environment we've been working in.
They're pretty big issues, like significant things to get right.
And, the AMC have been much easier to work with, have been much more collaborative. Medical board has been difficult. Things are improving, but it's made a very frustrating time. But particularly when you're saying, well, why are we doing this? The other thing most recently is it appears that our timelines are now as fast as the medical board. To be honest, the reports I've had back from people who've gone through them have not been all that positive. And the other thing in terms of their productivity, as far as we know, about 18 anaesthetists have applied. So far, they've processed 2. And it's reasonably opaque. We have the major concern that I know there's at least one anaesthetist on the medical board. There is no guarantee that the people doing the assessment of the submitted papers by the substantially comparable SIMG are actually, any of them are anaesthetists. So we have a process and then there's no formal assessment. The other thing is for the supervisors, the medical board have said they should seek advice from their medical insurer. Liability is something that's very unclear here. So you've got several types of liability. One would be if a patient were harmed, because if someone is a supervisor, particularly if they're in a hospital, but if someone is a supervisor on behalf of ANZCA, ANZCA is supporting that person. ANZCA carries some of the liability. The other then is if there are other problems. The medical board are very unclear about this.
So if there's an issue with somebody who's coming through on that substantially comparable pathway, and just say I was supervising them, but I've only worked in Australia for 12 months myself, so I'm doing this through the MBA.
Yep.
And there's an issue, a patient issue, a morbidity or, God help us, a mortality, then I could potentially have some liability for that as the supervisor.
This is the question the medical board is saying, ask your insurer. So it'd be interesting to know, I haven't asked any of the major insurers what they think, but this is a radically different situation. So going back to that issue around specialists, so we've got this issue that the hospitals are reluctant to employ people coming through as SIMGs. We know this from one particular jurisdiction because in theory they get consultant rates, although being supervised, not fellow rates.
Right.
So a hospital's saying, why do we want to take on someone who as a consultant or pay them consultant rates when they still require supervision? So they're not what we would view as a consultant. But the medical board say, oh yes, but they're not someone who's worked in this country previously.
And they can't work independently, really.
I do want to emphasise, however, that I'm not in any way deriding the quality of anaesthetists from the UK or Ireland.
No.
What I'm saying is that what we want is a reasonably rigorous assessment.
Yes.
The vast majority are fine, but occasionally they're not. Perhaps in many ways the bigger issue is quite a few struggle to settle in, I guess.
I think even if you're a fantastic anaesthetist, it's always a challenge struggling into a new country and a new environment. When I talk to people who've emigrated here from overseas, it is a challenge, and it's not just always work-based, but it's your family you have to adjust. Yeah. Your life has just changed radically.
I was going to say, one of my colleagues who's come through this process but came through 2 major Melbourne hospitals said you come to a new country, you've got no family support, you've got kids, your spouse is with you, there's jobs for them, you've got no friends often. And so there's one thing moving to a big city where you might be in a large hospital. It's another moving to a regional city, which is really where the government wants you to go.
I wanted to come back to that, but before I do, just going back to the medical indemnity, do you know, and this could be speculative, but how far that liability might extend? If I've supervised someone through that expedited pathway and I say, yep, they're fine to practice, but then they become the next Dr. Patel in anaesthesia. Do you think that there would be some ongoing liability for the supervisor who's approved them for specialist
I would
practice?
think yes, because as far as I know, the medical board takes no responsibility for it. It's very much untested. And this is the whole point. The only real clinical assessment is by the supervisor. So in the ANZCA program, you have assessment by a supervisor who's a FANZCA, and then you have an independent two-person workplace-based assessment by the college.
You've got multiple people involved.
So if they went on to be the next Dr. Patel in the following months, then it's the college that wears responsibility for not picking up that there was a problem, not the individual supervisor. So this has been one of our concerns, because also it goes to the broader issue of workplace-based assessments for trainees as well. There's pretty good evidence that workplace-based assessments tend to be overly positive. So are we truly going to see an accurate workplace-based assessment? It's a report to the medical board. Because anaesthetists are good people. Anaesthetists want to help others.
You want the person you're looking after to pass. You've got that vested interest.
But also you say to yourself, it's this whole thing about workplace-based assessment, say, for struggling trainees. You think, look, this person's struggling for a whole lot of reasons, including, say, mental health. And the last thing you want to do is really undermine their mental health by saying, look, you've got problems. And it's this sort of thing you want to carefully do. So if you've got a system where the only check on someone's practice is and that may be another example about the person's going along, but in fact they've become quite depressed because they're working in regional Australia and feel very, separation. And then they're just not coping. So it may not be that they do a Dr. Patel, but it may be that they're struggling and they wind up with the horrific clinical situation they just feel they can't deal with. Again, I don't want to undermine the quality of our substantially comparable SIMGs, but I think it's a big ask of the individual, the SIMG, but also of the supervisor. And this is why the college has continued the workplace-based assessment. It is costly, it costs a fair bit of money. But for the reasons I think we've just discussed, it's a very worthwhile thing. Because if someone then had their clinical practice questioned within 6 months, you say, well, place-based assessment was okay. And we are pretty solid on being as objective as possible, as much as a workplace-based assessment can be, but also to say there are problems here if necessary.
And it's just the principle of sharing the load amongst a few other specialists.
Oh, yeah.
Not just having it all coming down to one person's opinion. I wanted to ask you about the rural regional aspect of this. So the people who are coming through on the expedited pathway who are only coming from the UK and Ireland, as part of this, do they have to start work in regional and rural Australia? And the reason I ask this is because I used to work in retrieval, and I went to a talk at the ANZCA ASM actually. There was someone from the UK talking about retrieval, and he said the catchment area for Cairns was 300 kilometres to your nearest trauma centre, or something like that. And he showed the equivalent map from the UK, and 300 kilometres got, I think, 11 trauma centres within that radius. And so this is something that specialists might not be prepared for. They come out, work in a regional centre, have a critically ill, unwell patient and realise that the retrieval service is at least 4, 5, 6 hours away, and they are having to sit with this patient and manage them until the retrieval service can come and collect them. That just is a huge, I think, clinical difference. Are they having to come and work in these environments as part of that expedited path?
Well, the medical board says it's not their problem. I mean, this has been one of the fascinating things with all of this, that you say the whole aim of the game is to get more people to work in the regions, but there's actually no mechanism. So the medical board says, not our problem. We will approve them as specialist anaesthetists. And where they go is up to the system. The fascinating thing is that there isn't any clear work by government to make rural jobs more attractive. So I think it's basically status quo for everything else. There are people who may choose to go and work in the country, but you are a bit concerned that they'll think, oh yeah, North Queensland sounds great, not realising exactly the implications you're suggesting. By the way, you might be flying up to the Torres Strait. And by the way, Cairns is 37 degrees and 100% humidity. And you've come from Cardiff. So I think this is a major issue, that there has been no effort to have any sort of induction program, nor has the college been asked to really help. We're sort of meeting with various health ministers just to try and say, we are your friends, we're here to help. Part of the problem has been there's been a very negative attitude towards the colleges, particularly amongst health bureaucrats and I think ministerial advisors, which has poisoned the well. We're improving that relationship fairly quickly. And I must particularly point out the leadership of both Sanjay, who's stepping down as chair of the Council of Presidents of the Medical College, as all the colleges come together. And now I've got Karen Fielding coming in, who's just the past president of RACS, woman who's a rural orthopaedic surgeon. So really helps overturn the old boys club image that somehow the ministers have developed.
I think ANZCA has been very progressive in terms of when you look at the number of female presidents.
Oh yeah.
I'm very proud of our college for having that history. 50%
of our council's female over the last few years. So I think ANZCA as an organisation in terms of gender equity, I think is doing very well. And I think that's incredibly important. But it's also, just use particularly as past president of the ASA, that this is what I've said is our roles at college is to support, particularly if you look at things like Medicare item numbers and things like that, is to help provide the evidence to support evidence-based item numbers. And I must really thank the leadership of the ASA for being very collaborative with the college, and we really appreciate it.
Well, I know the enormous amount of effort that you and a number of academic anaesthetists who are leaders also in ANZCA put into, particularly with the MBS review, in helping us develop the scientific evidence and not develop, it was there, but summarising it and presenting it so that we could, when we had those meetings with the health bureaucrats, that we had all that information at our fingertips.
Yeah, I remember being directly present in a couple of those. It was quite interesting. But yeah, I think the advocacy part of the college in collaboration with the ASA is incredibly important.
Yeah. I wanted to just ask you one more question, which someone asked me recently on another podcast, but we're talking about the issues with regional workforce in anaesthesia in Australia. What do you think are some of the big policy changes that need to occur to rebalance this?
So there is the Rural Health Commissioner, and she sort of has released a report around this, and a number of us have been to meetings around this. The first is around trainee selection, and there is pretty good evidence that it's a bit of an ugly word, but rurality. So if people have all 3 points of the majority of their childhood or under 18 was spent in the country, that they did at least 2 years of medical school in the country and at least their internship in the country, they're much more likely to work in the country. The College of Surgeons now equates, if you have those 3 items, that's the same as a PhD for selection into surgery.
Really?
I suspect they're probably not just a linear thing, as being an academic. I think they're probably asymptotic. I think one of the big questions is that we assume that these are people you want to go into the regions. I wonder whether if you bring those people into city-based training, they'll still go back to the regions. The other factor not specifically mentioned is that it's well known in medical schools, remember my day job's in a medical school, is also that they have a partner who wants to work in the country. But as you know, that's the sort of question you can't ask, but it's an added bonus. So 2 other things just quickly. One is to actually ask trainees up front whether they would like to go to the country. I mean, it's one thing having enforced rotation in the country. It's another to identify those who would like to go to the country as part of their training, particularly if they're already rural. The third bit is, again, really talking about pipelines. The only way you get new medical school places these days in Australia is if they have a rural component. So I think in my own university, the University of Melbourne, we now have a rural school. So I think identifying those students early who might be interested in anaesthesia, particularly as they become younger doctors, to almost have a concierge service. So you say, okay, you've come through, you've done all these things. It really becomes almost a matter of why not rather than why. So in terms of an equity type approach, that you'd say, here are people that probably should go straight through. If they have all 3 rurality components and they get reasonable clinical reviews, and they should go straight through to interview.
Wow, there you go.
Well, in fact, one of the things for orthopaedic training was now if you're either Indigenous or a woman, you'll go straight through to interview. And so they decided that was one way to get around all the possible hidden biases that might still be in orthopaedic selection. I also just want to mention passing, there is a very big expectation of the colleges doing everything we can to support First Nations people to come into training. I think the college needs to work out how we can support them into training.
The slightly controversial question potentially to end on, but when we're talking about women, First Nations people automatically getting to interview, there'll be people out there who will say, this is not merit-based. So what do you say to that?
My view is, not just my view, but a view of the college more broadly, is that representation of our community is really important in our specialty. And there are many, women as the first group, who for many years have not really had a level playing field. And that's still the case. I mean, I was very interested to hear a Liberal Party politician saying that she believed they needed quotas. So here's the Conservative side of Australian politics saying they should take an equity approach.
Yeah.
So it is an equity approach where what we want is equity in outcome. That is outcomes rather than the, I think, often mistaken belief that in fact the opportunity is equal. It's just not. And I think that's the fundamental thing. As much as we try and tell ourselves, and as much as people might say, oh, yes, it's all fair, it's not. That's the reality. It just amazes me sometimes when I actually sit down with female colleagues and talk about their experiences, and it's so radically different from what I've had. I'm a tall, white male, and my experience has just been the experience of the tall, white male. And I need to remember that the experience of others is so different, and that includes most of my female colleagues. I mean, no patients ever thought I was a nurse.
No one? Not even one? Really?
As far as I don't know.
That's amazing.
But, when you hear female colleagues sort of go through the whole explanation and then, when's the doctor going to come and see me? Or, yes, sister, can I have a bedpan sort of thing? I think to answer the question specifically, we actually complete our fellowship survey, and fellows of the college can go to the college and get a copy of that. I actually said this in a meeting with a large group of private practitioners really to talk things through. And, I was challenged on this very point. But if you look at the college survey and if you go to the diversity component, so everyone agrees that training and safety and quality and CPD and things are a vital component of the college. But if you go to diversity, there's greater variation in views. But basically and this is one of the bits I found fascinating. So 75% of women saw it as important for the college, but 50% of blokes. But overall, a majority of fellows of our college believe that diversity is important. Yes, there's about 20% of blokes who think it's unimportant and about 8% of women. So there's this big gender difference in what they think about it. The other thing is it's very clear that there is a duration of practice, or there's a surrogate for age-related difference. So the future of our college, that is, the younger fellows see diversity as important. It just so happens that the demographic seems to be the same as other things around politics, older blokes from Queensland who think that this is all sort of woke bullshit and everything else. The college survey data did not support that proposition. Yes, there are those who don't think it's a big priority, but the majority think it is important for the college. And so that is my answer to those. I can find no evidence of this big silent majority who think that, we're woke and, we're going in the wrong direction. I get unhappy emails from fellows every now and then. It's really interesting. I usually get the two ends of the spectrum on any particular topic.
Well, that means you're doing a good job then.
Exactly. Yeah, no. Well, that's what I've learned. I've also sort of in leadership meetings saying, look, you won't please everyone, and the most messages you'll get are from usually the two extremes, and you're either not doing enough or you're doing too much, and so if you go through the middle, you're probably doing about the right thing. But I guess I'm really mindful that the opinions that I really value are those early to mid-career fellows, because they are the future of the college. I think the colleges collectively play a major role in the quality of medical education in Australia. That component is currently inadequately recognised by government and particularly by health departments.
Well, hopefully they will understand a little bit more about the important role that the college does. But look, thank you. Thanks so much for giving up some time this morning. Thank you for waving the flag for diversity.
Thanks so much, Susie.
Well, I hope you enjoyed hearing this update on the expedited SIMG pathway and some thoughts around trainee selection. It's always great chatting with Dave. I should have pointed out at the start, but I had so many other things I wanted to get off my chest, that he is technically my boss at the University of Melbourne, and therefore I'm declaring this podcast with him as a potential conflict of interest. I hope you appreciate how closely ANZCA and the ASA work together and how many of our policies are aligned, as well as being aligned with those of the AMA. As I promised at the start, I'm going to explain some of the acronyms that people from overseas might not be so familiar with. However, I encourage you to do your own research, and the reasons why I hope will become clear in a bit. So, at the ASA, we have various levels of membership. By far the biggest category is for specialist anaesthetists who are working in Australia. If you are not yet a specialist, but you have a significant interest or want to become an anaesthetist, then we warmly welcome you as members as well. You do need to be a doctor. We don't accept medical students. And in that regard, we are not involved with defining who is a specialist anaesthetist here. That responsibility lies with the college, as you've just heard, as well as with the Medical Board of Australia in this new expedited pathway. The AMC, or Australian Medical Council, assesses international medical graduates to see whether what you learnt at medical school, that your skills and knowledge meet Australian standards. As part of that, they conduct exams. The Medical Board of Australia manages your registration as a doctor here. You need to be registered in order to practice. There's different categories of registration which define how and perhaps where you practice. The Medical Board sets standards for doctors, and that is essentially operationalised by APRA, the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency. We mentioned EMAC in this conversation. EMAC stands for Effective Management of Anaesthetic Crises. It's a simulation-based course, and you need to complete it if you are an SIMG. It is also highly recommended for Australian anaesthesia trainees to do this course, so it might be quite competitive getting onto a course. You might recall Dave and I discussing Dr. Patel during our conversation. We are referring to Dr. Jayant Patel, who is an Indian-born American surgeon employed in Australia under the Area of Need program and subsequently charged with manslaughter, grievous bodily harm, negligence and fraud. Ultimately, the charges were dropped or acquitted on appeal, but he did plead guilty to dishonestly gaining medical registration and employment, which is why it was of relevance in this episode. Okay, folks from overseas, I hope that answers a few of your questions. Here at the ASA, we have a number of resources to help you navigate migrating here as a specialist. We understand that it is a huge time of transition. We conduct regular exam practice sessions. There's a huge video library of them too, so you can see what the standard required might be if you need to sit exams. As part of your medical registration, you will also need to have a CPD home. CPD stands for Continuing Practice Development, and we provide a CPD home in conjunction with the Australian Medical Association, or AMA. Within that, there's a program as well as CPD content that's relevant to anaesthetists no matter what stage of your career that you're in. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. All right, that was a lot for me to discuss in this episode. It reflects the many, many discussions going on right now around workforce. If you are from overseas and you have any further questions, feel free to contact me. podcast@asa.org.au is the best email. I support you wanting to stay or become a specialist anaesthetist. It is a great career. Whichever stage you're in, until the next time, I hope you stay safe and well out there. Thank you for listening.
This has been Australian Anaesthesia, produced by the Australian Society of Anaesthetists with many thanks to host and editor Dr. Susie New, with music by Soda Lime Music, sound and engineering by Bearview, and graphics by the ASA Communications team. For more content, please visit www.asa.org.au.